Good afternoon and welcome everybody to the final workshop on how to set up your food garden. My name is Jane Cherry from the Cooperative and Policy Alternative Centre, and we are a partner of the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign. Together, COPAC and SAFSI are bringing you this workshop series. And today's workshop is sadly the fourth and final workshop of this series, where we will look at how to maintain your food garden, but we're also going to get an input from BioWatch on agroecology in practice and theory in South Africa. So before I hand over to our speakers with the exciting presentations, I'm just going to run you through the housekeeping, which I've shared here on my screen with you. Firstly, just a reminder to please use the chat. We would prefer a more interactive platform, but with many participants, we can't allow you to speak. So if you have any questions along the way, please write them in the chat and we'll address them at the end of the workshop. We are streaming live on Facebook, so if for some reason you get kicked off this webinar, you can join again on Facebook at SA Food Sovereignty. We are recording all of these sessions and we have uploaded all the recordings onto YouTube. They're also available on the Facebook channel, and we will on Facebook, and we will send you the links to everyone who's registered over email after this. And then we have managed to put together an agroecology advice panel. So if you do have any questions, send me a message, send us a DM on Facebook, and we will be able to pass on the numbers of the 3 agroecology experts, and you'll be able to WhatsApp them with any questions that you have. And then finally, just a reminder to please follow safety guidelines. We are doing these workshops in the time of a COVID pandemic. So you can see on that link there where you can find some guidelines. And this is what the safety guidelines look like. So please be sure to follow these guidelines in your farms and in your household gardens. All right, stop sharing. Okay, so as I said, we've got input from Vanessa Black from BioWatch, and then we've got John again to walk us through how to maintain your food garden. After that, we'll take questions. So I'm going to hand over to Vanessa to give us an introduction to agroecology. Thanks, Vanessa.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to switch to my share screen. All right. Good afternoon, and thank you to COPAC and South African Food Sovereignty Campaign for inviting BioWatch. James asked us to do an overview of what agroecology is and why we need it in South Africa. So what it is. So there's 3 aspects to agroecology that people talk about. One is that it's a practice that learns from and works together with nature. The second is that it's the science of applying ecological principles to agronomy. And just to say that the history of agroecology, it's sort of developed over time. So the first person to mention it as a word was a Russian-born agronomist who in 1928 started talking about how one could look at crop research in a different way, the ecology of crop research. And then another ecologist in the 1950s wrote a book that spoke about agroecology in the title, and he was looking at crop production and insect-plant relationships, etc. So it started off as the science of applying ecology to agronomy first, and then to agro in general. But as with the change of the science of ecology over time, the way that ecology was applied to agriculture also changed. So in the 1980s and 1990s, people started looking at ecologies in terms of systems and not just single spots. And so we're getting people saying that agroecology is applied to managing whole ecological systems or agroecosystems. And just to remember that then in the in the 1960s and 70s. And in 1962, Rachel Carson wrote her book Silent Spring, that was really talking to the impact of pesticides in the environment for the first time. So you can see the link there. And then over time, that also developed where people started looking even more broadly than localized ecosystems and started to do the whole green revolution of agriculture. And so in the 1970s and 80s, you got more people talking about systems thinking and ecology as systems, and then the agroecological system on a broader scale, and then eventually looking at the food system as a whole as an ecology. And in the 90s and 2000s, you started having the formation of social movements that really started reacting to the taking away of land, of the, it was the time of the soya republics, for example, where in Latin America, massive pieces of land were taken over for monocrops, used GMOs and masses of pesticide, and completely displacing people from the land. And so, for example, in 1993, we see the founding of La Via Campesina as a movement of producers globally who really started resisting to the enclosure of the commons and the industrial agriculture system. And so that's how agroecology then became a movement where connecting producers and taking on a more political agenda. And I want to just take us to this movement of people and the social movements. And this is the food sovereignty campaign, so I'm sure you all know what food sovereignty is, but it's basically about taking back that right to one's territory, to one's resources, to one's health, one's food, to being able to produce one's own food that one chooses for oneself, that's culturally appropriate and where one's in control of what one produces and how one consumes food. So that food sovereignty was defined in 2007 when social movements came together at Nieleni in Mali. And then the same grouping together in 2015 to do another conference around agroecology and what agroecology was and how agroecology relates to food sovereignty. And in particular, the declaration that came out of that, which is really good to read, speaks about having a common understanding of agroecology as the key element for the construction of food sovereignty. That Nieleni Declaration speaks about many things that are apt in our scrolls today. So it talks about territories being fundamental to agroecology. It talks about collective rights and access to the commons, the importance of diverse knowledges and ways of knowing. It talks about having an equilibrium between nature, our understanding of cosmos, and people, humans. It focuses very much on collective organizing, so community cooperatives coming together to resist. It talks about having autonomy from the global market and being in control. And it says that women's knowledge and value and vision is really central to agroecology, as is the space created for youth, as a radical space for youth. And it also speaks about agroecology being political because it requires us to transform structures of power in order to keep our cultures intact, our resources intact. And then there's this quote from the declaration, which I really love, which is, agroecology is a way of life and the language of nature. It's not a mere set of technologies or production practices, and it cannot be implemented in the same way in all places. Rather, it is based on principles that, while being across the diversity of our territories, can and are practiced in many different ways, with each sector contributing their own colors of their local reality and culture, while always respecting Mother Earth and our common shared values. So that's for me, a very crucial part of the understanding of agroecology. So very often we're so used to a recipe, a sort of like standard way of doing things, and we want instruction. It's not about that. It's about understanding the principles behind it and then applying them in the best, most creative, culturally appropriate way that we can in the climate and realities we have in our place. So if we're talking about natural ecosystems and learning from nature, it looks to, and this is the ecology part, what's inherent in natural systems. And so we see, and I just wanted to put this in here. It sounds, like we were getting very focused on the ecology, but I think these principles also can inform the way we relate in. So it's not just about the agricultural culture and ecology, but also our general ecology as communities, etc. So it's about interdependency and the web of life, self-regulation, self-renewal, self-sufficiency, efficiency, not wasting resources, energy, and diversity. 5 key scientific principles of agroecology. And the white is sort of like the more science formulation, and then the yellow is my reinterpretation of what that means. So it's about balancing nutrient flows. So it's about returning, for example, organic waste to the soil, and always remembering that waste from one thing should become the food for something else. So how does one design that in? It's about creating healthy living soil with enough organic matter and microorganisms. It's about conserving resources through designing of circular processes. It's building in national diversity in every way. And so it's not just creating diversity for diversity's sake, but it's really about understanding how things relate to each other. So it's really a relational science. So it's between species, also above and below ground, and in time and space. So it requires us to think through seasons, through years. And I'm sure John's been really talking about that a lot in his presentations. And then it's about creating as many good connections as possible and letting nature do the work. So it's enhancing those biological interactions. So we're saying yes to diverse agroecological systems. And just to note that it's not just about our farm and even our community, but it requires us to think more broadly around how our pieces of land connect with other pieces of how our land that we cultivating, or where we're producing, or where we're harvesting fish, for example, how that relates to other parcels of land adjacent to us broadly, and how we also give space to the natural ecosystem, not only for its own sake, but also because of the many things that we harvest from it. So agroecology talks about different production, many different kinds of production, but it also talks about how we acknowledge the wild space and value it for the services it provides to us in terms of food, what we can harvest, but also the wildlife that interacts with our own land. So questions we always get is agroecology versus, like, how does this relate to permaculture? How does this relate to other forms of production? So agroecology is a very broad term. At the very base, it's organic. So we're saying that it shouldn't be using chemical inputs, industrial inputs. It shouldn't be using GMOs. But not all organic production is agroecology, because you also get some organic production that just tries to substitute the chemical inputs for non-chemical inputs, and it's still monoculture, and it doesn't change the power dynamics, doesn't change anything in the way that agroecology is trying to do. So there's that differentiation. Permaculture is included as agroecology. It's a design system, so it's putting some of the things into principles that we can use to design our space. And I think very much in African permaculture, agroecology and permaculture is one and the same thing, but it did come from a very different route. So it came from people who came with an idea around design and intentional design, and sometimes it's sort of in communities, not communities that exist and are part of the movement from the ground. So that might be some distinction. So that's, yeah, and then also agroforestry is often also included in agroecology. And again, it just depends how much is it. So I think we have to think about things as a continuum where we're trying to transition. We're all in various stages along that transition process to a more sustainable world, and a world where we have more equal power relations, our rights are respected, and different people are in different stages of that journey. So why do we need agroecology? That's what agroecology was in a nutshell. Please summarize because time is short. So why we need it is precisely as outlined in the Nyeleni declarations, because the global food system is becoming an industrialized food system. It's characterized by green revolution technologies. It has various impacts, many diverse impacts. So it impacts health and nutrition, biodiversity, and some of these. Our land, our water, our seeds, so our sovereignty over our resources. It concentrates power, and it's heavily polluting and having very disastrous impacts on land, water, and our bodies. Some of these, and I think everyone here really knows the inequities we have in South Africa around land and water. So on the left is a picture taken from one of the communities we work in, where in the distance you can see, this was in the middle of winter last year, a bad drought that has persisted to this year, where there's no water and communities have been forcefully removed up and pushed up into the hillsides. But in the distance you can see the flat plain where the sugar farms are being irrigated in the middle of a drought, and in the emerald green. And then we've got encroachments on land and on our water from both mining, but also monoculture plantations, and whether industrial food crops like maize or non-food crops like sugar or plantations, they all impact on our land and our resources, and particularly our water. The industrial food system and the green revolution is characterized by these, the suite of inputs. So it's mechanized, it requires irrigation often. The monoculture that's produced is very delicate. It requires, it's with improved seed, hybrid seed, and more recently GMO seed, and they require fertilizers and irrigation and heavy chemical inputs to be able to grow well. So you get increased production, and the whole purpose of the Green Revolution is to increase production, but it doesn't take into account any of the impacts, and they just get externalized. With that input pack, which is very corporate controlled and about business, you also have corporate control of the whole value chain. And this is from research from ACB, just looking at the South African value chain, and it might have changed a little, but it's still incredibly concentrated. So we've got these few supermarket chains that control the food that we buy, and we saw very much in times of COVID just how much control that they have, their ability to hike prices, and how they really, if you can't access them, you cut off, you don't get food. There's the control over the silo capacity, all the interim parts of that value chain, the processing, so taking the original things and processing them into products, and then the input market. And just in terms of seed, for example, our main crops are owned by just 2 companies. And this is all part of an industrial food product value chain. So in the industrial system, food is seen as a product, and it's subject to this mass production chain that starts with inputs, goes to production, processing, manufacturing, retail, consumption, and finally waste. And it's an input-output system. Also, you can see that producers and consumers or eaters are very distant. You don't know them, and there's a long series of interactions and exchanges that happen and transport that happens between you and them. And it's a very problematic system, as we saw from the listeriosis outbreak, that has a lot of impacts on our health and on the environment. Just as an illustration, that chain doesn't just operate in South Africa, it operates globally. So these are outdated pictures, but I couldn't find updated ones. So this is just an example, of the imports and exports globally, and the pink is the exported and the khaki is the imported goods. And if you can see where the main exporting countries are in North America, Latin America is sort of in and out, Southeast Asia is a bit of a balance. And then you look at who's pushing some of these industrial inputs, so North America, and also look at what kind of production. So if this is a map of countries that have adopted GMOs, and the purple countries are the ones that have more than 9,000 hectares. And you can see who the main GM producers are, and that GM production system goes hand in hand with Roundup, for example, and fertilizer and complete displacement of the people that were on the land before. So it's really about a whole money-making system. It's not the people and the impacts on people or the planet in its sites. And one of the biggest impacts of that whole value chain is the impact on our climate. And for a long time, that wasn't adequately raised in climate debates. So there was an organization called GRAIN, not GRAIN South Africa, an NGO called GRAIN internationally, that first started looking at what is the impact of the whole food system on the climate. And in 2011, they looked at it and unpacked the components from every part of the food, this chain of production, and concluded that almost half of climate emissions actually come from the global food system. And finally, last year, the IPCC looked at the food system's contribution to climate change, and they have said that 25 to 32% of emissions come from the food system, but they hadn't been able to fully look at the transport components. So it might be higher than that figure. So really, the food system is critical to our impact on the planet. Other impacts include biodiversity loss, and just taking a look at one, last year was a big year for looking at the impacts on biodiversity, and one of the studies looked at insects and found that 40% of insect species are threatened with extinction. And the main drivers of that are habitat conversion to intensive agriculture, agrochemical pollutants, invasive species, and climate change. And as we know now, climate change is very much, the industrial food system is very much a driver of that. And then we often think about biodiversity in terms of those, that space out there that's not part of us. And the impacts to biodiversity also impact in our food system and include impacts to our agricultural diversity. So we've seen huge drops, not only in wild harvested foods on which many people depend, but also in the species that we use for food production. So of the many species of crops, for example, that are available to us, we only use 200 currently, and 66% of our current crop production, 2/3, is based on just 9 of these. So it's very fragile and unstable. And then the same is the case for livestock breeds, where we're losing many of the local livestock breeds that are resilient to local conditions and part of the culture. So only 7% of those are not at risk in some way. So I want to just throw in this slide here, because we really need to change the food system. And there's an interesting organization called IPES Food that puts out amazing papers on food system issues and agroecology. And this is a slide from one of their papers in 2016, looking at the 8 lock-ins of industrial agriculture and why we're not changing, why we're not transitioning to agroecology. And many of them are arguments that we see here. So first of all, if you've invested a lot of money in something, you find it difficult to change. We also measure success on the wrong things. We measure success on GDP. We have export orientation often. So I know that's sort of one thing we hear from our government a lot, like about exports, niche markets, but not so much about food security at the local level. There's also expectation that food must be cheap. We think in compartments, we think in the short term. At the center of that is concentration of power. And a very key part of that concentration of power is the narratives that those powerful corporations drive through the world. And feeding the world is one of those key narratives, where we constantly get told that there's not enough food and that we need to produce more food for a growing population. And that productivist mind frame is really a problem and a false, it's a myth that we need to challenge. So looking at South Africa, and you might have thought I'd forgotten a key impact, but looking at a little bit at that myth around production, I also was struggling to find more updated maps of this, but this is a map in 2009, I think, showing how much food is produced per person in calories. And if you look at South Africa, we're producing around 3,000 calories per person if you divide the production up between everyone. But having said that, we also know that we have shocking statistics for hunger, with half of South Africa hungry, and probably even more now, COVID pandemic. And we really have shocking statistics around malnutrition. So we have 1 in 4 children being stunted. We also have conditions around malnutrition. So stunting is one of them, but we have, for example, high rates of diabetes. I heard there were 9 amputations of people suffering from diabetes in just the KZN province. And then the flip side of malnutrition is also high. We see obesity climbing in South Africa, especially in urban areas. And it's about people having access to nutritious, healthy food and diverse food. It's eating the same starchy, oily, fast food or nutrient food every day, and then still being subjected to periods of no access to food. So we really need to radically change our food system. And the things that people have experienced during the pandemic have really raised awareness on the fragility of our food system, how many people are hungry, how many people can't access food, and how the industrial food system really fails us, and that the informal food system and smallholder production is really essential, not only for rural development, being government's main focus, but also in urban areas. And from many conversations that have been happening in the past months, both in the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign, but also in response to the smallholder support grants that government made available and which missed the mark completely. And just people's solidarity on the ground and trying to organize to get food to vulnerable communities on the ground. People are much more aware of needing to change the food system, especially at local and more generally in the country. And so there is an initiative that we started last year, starting to talk about how we can work together to catalyze the transition to agroecology in South Africa, and that's really taken legs this year with many more people joining and being interested. And you can contact us. It's looking at producers, food producers, farmers, academics, individuals, and civil society organizations trying to work together more to get this transition happening. And then just to say, I've really rushed through so many important topics. If you'd like to get more information, do look on our website. There's resources that you can download there. And just to end, to say that we need agroecology for a sustainable food system that supports and builds biodiversity, nutrition, and climate resilience. And that has many positive, from healthy and nutritious food to ensuring food and resource sovereignty, conserving water, building healthy soils, being zero waste, to strengthening livelihoods, local and rural economies, and urban economies, supporting cooperation and abundance, building healthy and inclusive communities, and valuing and conserving biodiversity. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for that very clear input. Although you didn't have much time, you really did manage to cover a lot and really argue for the case of agroecology. So thank you for that. That was really great. I'm going to hand straight over to John. So we did a pre-recording of John. John is currently somewhere in Mpumalanga, close to the Swaziland border. We did a pre-recording of him yesterday, but the signal wasn't that great. It seems to be a lot better today. So hopefully today's session will go well. And John will talk to us about maintaining your food garden. Thanks, John. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. Today we are going to talk about how we can maintain our food gardens. Can be small garden or large garden, but basically the principles are the same. And mostly, the most important thing to start with is to observe. Just to observe what you have set. What kind of garden have you set? What is in the garden? Is it having diverse of plants? Is it one type of plant? And if it's diverse, that's all what we are promoting to see, wide variety of plants. You also need to observe the sunlight. Is the garden set where the sunlight is coming through so that the plants can grow? We also need to observe if there is no obstacle like shade on your crops. So you need to understand that all the time you need to visit your garden with a notebook. Check what's happening in the garden. Like a child, I wonder why things are going this way. Are they wilting plants? Are they plants that are eaten on in the leaves? Are there plants that are not growing well? Why other plants are growing well? So that will give you a benchmark to say what is the next step to manage your garden. So I'll go again now to other step that you need to look at plant health. Plant health is mainly determined by looking at the plant growth, the characteristic of plant. Is it really showing the real characteristic of the plant you have planted or the seedlings that you have planted? Do you see insects in there? And if you see insects in the garden, what type of insects are they? Are they friendly insects? Are they predators? Are they insects eating other insects? Are they insects eating the vegetables? So you record that to make sure that if it's a pest, insect pest, then you know how you can manage it, how you can control it. There are so many means that we can do to control that. We need to look at the different means of if it's a pest in the garden, how do you control it? So you encourage predators to come in the garden. Like you can make piles of stones in the garden, or you can have strong smelling plants in the garden that can attract certain insects. You can have plants that are colorful with good flowers that attract wasps in the garden. And then the wasps, they can be able to go to the crops or to the insects that are attacking the crops. They can, you can also look at how you can mix different crops in the field. For example, if you have only one type of crop like spinach, so how can you have another crop in the same field? So you can plant onion just to make sure that the diversity is improved. You can look at crop rotation in that instance when you are checking about crop plant health. Are you doing crop rotation in the system? And that also helps in controlling and repelling some pests in the garden. Do you have plants that are eaten or eaten by other insects? Like this one, you can see it's beetroot, but at the edge it's eaten. This is grasshopper that is eaten, and sometimes you find it's eaten by cutworms or by caterpillars or some moths that can attack the beetroot or other crops. So when you know the type of crop, the type of insect eating or attacking the pests, attacking the crops, then you know how you can control the pest. You know whether you can pick it or whether you can allow prey mantis to come, lizards to come, chameleons to come to feed on it, and then the insect or the pest is reduced, is wiped out, is removed in the project, in the garden. You also need to encourage the pollinators in the garden so that they help the health of the plants. Pollinators like bees, they can come in the garden and they can help in the pollination so that we have the seeds. But basically here we are looking at the health of the plants. If there are diseases, you also need to define, is this plant growing the normal way or it has a disease? So diseases are either found by, if you see like potatoes like this, potato leaves drying like this, it's a wilt, it's a bacteria that is attacking the potatoes. So when you have such diseases or another disease, you know now how can you control it. Then you use some natural means of controlling the diseases in the field. We'll talk about pest control management in the future. So where we can deal with the exact local pests that we can use to control different pests and different diseases. In your garden, you need to identify volunteer plants. The volunteer plants are what we call weeds, but sometimes some of these weeds are edible. So we need to find out whether this weed is it edible or it's a weed that can be removed. For example, you can find out that you have this plant with yellow flower like this, and it's chickweed. This one, it's a chickweed, and chickweed is a vegetable you can eat. So when you see it in the garden, you need just to manage. When you manage it, you select some, you remove some, you can dry them, and some you can eat. You can cook as vegetables. You can also come across milk thistle, like this one. It's a milk thistle. You can find it in garden, and it's a vegetable, but it's commonly known as a weed. So voluntary plants, some of them are good vegetables, and they can be used as they're good vegetables, but some they can call them a weed. So we need to define, have a record all the time, what crop is it? I wonder why is this crop growing in this area? And then you record its characteristics and you share with others. And probably you will keep a medicinal plant there that can be used in future. So we need to know our plants in the field. We also need to make sure that we know we manage or maintain crops. And when you maintain crops, check in your garden. what diversity do you have in the garden? Do you have pulses and nuts in the garden? Do you have herbs? Do you have cereals? Do you have vegetables, like leaf vegetables? Do you have roots and tubers? Do you have legumes? And if you have that diversity and you have them planted in a small portion, it means you are addressing nutritional security. And once you have these plants, then you need just to maintain them in a way that they grow healthy and they support your family. And when you say growing healthy, it means they can be mixed with other crops. You can promote the mixing or companion planting. You can also do crop rotation. And this crop rotation, we can consider what I explained last time. Heavy feeders, light feeders, herbaceous, and heavy givers. The same group, these groups can be also divided as the heavy feeders, mainly they are the leaf and the fruit crops. And the light feeders, they are the root and the tubers. The herbaceous are the herbs, like parsley, celery, and other herbs. And the heavy givers, they are the legumes, beans, peas, or legume plants can be called the heavy givers. So you do rotation with these species. And when you do rotation, there are two means of rotation. There is a formal rotation and there is non-formal rotation. Non-formal rotation is when you have a main crop like spinach in your vegetable, in your garden. Then you bring in onion in the same field. Spinach can take a year in the same place. Then onion is ready, you remove onion, and then you bring root crop closer to the spinach. That is informal rotation. But formal rotation is when you have been in one portion, you remove the beans, and then you bring cabbage or Brussels sprout, and then they grow after the legume. That's a formal crop rotation. And then you bring another type after that, as you rotate 4 times before you bring the crop that started with rotation. You need in the crops, when you are maintaining the crops, you need to check on the colors. Do you have different colors in the field? Your crops, are they only one color, green? And if it's green without other colors, it means you are not addressing the dietary needs or the nutritional security, because the different colors, they help in antioxidant and they help in building up the white blood cells. So it helps to address what is required by your body to resist against diseases. Also, we need to identify weak plants. Is there a plant that is growing slowly? Or is there a plant that is not growing normal like others? And if it's not growing normal, it means it doesn't have good nutrients. So you feed it with the liquid manure. Prepare liquid manure either from FM farm or from green leaves or from almond manure or fermented almond manure. Then you apply it to the crop that is not growing well. You also need to check with crops that every crop is grown on the right season. If crops are not planted on the right season, sometimes they don't grow well. You also need to check the succession. Succession means, do you have mature plants and do you have younger plants? Do you have a nursery that is supplying your garden with the new seedlings? And so that after an old plant, then you bring in new plants without going out to get new plants from other big companies or from external inputs. We are looking at that you design a system that provides internal inputs. All seedlings are coming within your farm. Even manure is coming within, or compost is coming within your farm. Internal inputs is cheaper than external inputs, and it's not synthetic chemicals, but natural chemicals that you can use in your garden. For crops also, you need to check about the time of the season. Some season they need, some crops need protection from frost, and also some crops need protection from the wind. So you can have a mean windbreak with lucerne for the vegetables, or with the anasadundias for herbs, for herbal plants, or wild dagger, the plants that can create a good fence for the crops, so that wind cannot erode the soil or cannot make the soil dry. Watering in winter, crops are watered in the morning, because if you water in the afternoon in winter, the problem is you are putting water, and water is staying in the soil, and at night the temperatures are low. Then it can cause the plants it can hinder plants to grow because of the cold that we have created because of the water in the soil. But in summer we water in the afternoon and in the evening, because it helps a lot to conserve the water, and water can infiltrate slowly in the soil without much evaporation. And it is important in that water should go into the soil rather than run on the surface. If you observe in your garden there is water running on the surface, it means you are doing poor water management. So water should be forced to go into the ground rather than running on the surface. If you happen to use grey water, the grey water, it's not good to water it direct on a plant. The grey water is good when you filter it. You filter it, and then after that, then you can use it in the garden. Even if you filter, do not put it on the surface where it's not mulched, where it's not, the ground is not covered. Then it can cause salt to stay on the surface and it kills plants. So it is important to know the water that is should go into the ground. Never allow waterlogging in your garden. Waterlogging can kill plants. If you see water stagnating in the garden, make sure that the water is directed to go into the ground, or bring a fork and loosen the soil a little bit so that the water can go down into the ground. So this is very important about water. And about watering, tomatoes, do not water tomatoes on the leaves. Water tomatoes on the ground. And it is better or recommended to use drip irrigation than to use flood irrigation or to use sprinkle irrigation on tomatoes. Drip irrigation is good for all types of crops. So it is very important to consider that when you are dealing with water. The last part of our maintenance is about soil. The most important thing is to, when you observe, you walk in your garden, make sure that you see soil covered. If soil is not covered, you see soil exposed to sun, exposed to the wind. It means you are killing some microorganisms. So soil should be covered. And then with soil, when it's covered, you create a good soil and healthy soil, like the soil from our garden here. It's good soil, healthy soil with earthworms, and this is what you want to see. And when you put your hand in the soil, it should show that there are lots of minerals, and it's good enough, and it shows that you have a lot of microorganisms, and also biomass, small twigs in the soil, some roots. It shows that you have good soil. But if it's soil that is just bare without the organisms, it's a dead soil. So we are here to create healthy soil for healthy plants, for healthy people. So in the soil, earthworms should be seen in there, should see earthworms. And if the soil is hard, try to loosen it by a fork, but do not turn the soil. Once you turn the soil, you are exposing the microorganism on the surface, and then they are scorched by sun and they die, and then you are creating a small desert in your own field. Make sure that you use decomposed manure or compost in your garden. If you use manure is any droppings from animals, and if you use that direct in the field, it's sometimes to bring lots of weeds, and sometimes it's not having balanced nutrients for the plant. So all manure and grass should go in a compost, and after compost, then you bring it back into the garden. Or the green grass can be fed to earthworms, and then you use earthworm cast to feed your soil, and or earthworm liquid manure to feed your soil. In pathways, and beds should be covered. The pathway where you walk into your garden, you cover it, it's a blanket. We say earlier, cover or dry grass in the pathway or in the garden, it's a blanket of the soil. If the blanket of the soil is removed, the soil is exposed, and many microorganisms are affected, and they cannot multiply, and they die, and your soil is created. You are creating a soil that is stressed, that cannot feed your plants, and we can make sure that we can change that situation by covering the soil. Also, crop rotation is very important when you are talking about soil, so that the nutrients of certain plants that are required by certain plants are not depleted. So when you do crop rotation, you are bringing other nutrients in the same place, and then also the soil is improved. Like if you bring legumes it helps to bring nitrogen, and also the biomass of the legumes helps to bring wide variety of nutrients like phosphorus, zinc, potassium, and others. So it is important to do crop rotation all the time. And you can practice both formal crop rotation and non-formal crop rotation. So in conclusion, we are saying as you visit or check your garden, have a notebook and have a tick box of checking diversity. How much diversity is in your garden? How many plants are there? Per square meter, how many plants are there? Is there colors in that diversity? Is there tall, short, ground cover crops in that diversity? Or it's only one monoculture type of farming? So in agroecology permaculture, we promote diversity farming, which is polyculture farming. Another tick that you need to give to yourself is about soil conservation. Is there no soil erosion that is taking place on your farm? And then manage soil erosion. And once you manage soil erosion, you are managing topsoil, you are managing the healthiest soil in your garden. Once the soil is not conserved, the topsoil is eroded and it's exported to the ocean. So it is important to make sure that soil conservation is applied. Soil health. If you take your soil from the field and you smell it, you test it, like this one, I can smell it, I can test it, I can just check whether it's the loam soil or it's the sand. Once you have this and it's giving you positive answers, it has lots of minerals, it has lots of small twigs, it has microorganisms, it's blackish, it is a health soil. So this is what we try to create in our garden, so that plants can grow easy in that environment with good soil. Soil cover, as I said earlier, this is a tick box that you need to check if the soil is covered. Cover with live cover or cover with dead cover. The dead cover is the dry grass. The live cover is the green manure cover crops, like the lablab we talked last time, the cowpeas and others. Your tick box, you need to check water conservation. Are you doing water conservation in your field? Are you not allowing any drop of water that comes on the farm to go? Any drop of water that comes on your farm should be captured and forced to go in the ground or stored in a tank or in a container. That will help you to use it in the future. If water hit the ground that is bare, it splash and move. It accumulates and start taking your topsoil and takes it to the ocean. You cannot bring it back again. So it is important, as in our small gardens to do a good water conservation system. Pest management. What insect is it in your garden? How can you do you know how to identify a pest? And if it's a pest, how can you repel it? How can you encourage predators to come to create food, the pest to be food for other insects? So that is us, we have to do it. Nutrition security. Is your garden addressing nutrition security? It's a check that you need to tick, put a cross or put a tick. Nutrition security, is it providing all the nutrients that are required by the family? And color. The diet is determined by more the colors that you find in the garden. And know your plants. You need to make sure that you have a list of the plants that are in your garden and use the plants accordingly, or grow the plants and share with others from the area you are or the community you are. And let's try to use local available agricultural inputs rather than external agricultural inputs. And for today, that's what I like to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, for that really great input. So many lessons in there. Yeah, and I'll definitely take my notebook out into my garden as soon as I can. There's a few questions in the chat. And just a reminder, if any of you have any questions on Vanessa's input or on John's, please write them in the chat. We've got some time to answer some of the questions. So, John, I'm just going to start with some questions that have been addressed to you. So there's been one question about how to keep birds away from plants. And then also, how much water does the pepper family need? Those are two questions from Shadrach.
Question one, please. To win the air. Question one.
Oh, sorry. So question one is how to keep birds away from eating.
How can you chase birds away?
Yes, from your plants.
Birds are part of the system, but birds can be chased in different forms. If you have a cat in your garden, birds can go run away because of a cat. If you have the cats in the garden, you teach your cats to roam in the garden. They can repel birds in the garden.
The other question was about watering the pepper family. How much water do peppers need?
The pepper too.
Pepper.
How much water for what?
For the pepper family.
Yeah, I don't know why I can't hear you. Jen,
Yeah.
how much water for?
For the pepper family, like red pepper.
Oh, for the chilies and red peppers.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. The chili red peppers, they don't need a lot of water compared to leaf vegetables. You can water once a week for the chilies, as long as you give them good dose, and then they don't need a lot of water compared to most vegetables that we can grow in the field.
Okay, thank you. And then someone is asking, so if they have cat allergies, how do they keep away birds, but also rats?
The best way of rat is to trap them, to have a trap, then you can catch the rat. But or rodents, yeah, you can do that. But birds, if you do not have a cat, you can use the scarecrows, like putting them in the garden, like something like an eagle. Sometimes they run away, and sometimes you need to intensify diversity in your garden. If you have lots of plants with the different seeds like indigenous plants, the birds tend to go to the trees compared than eating your vegetables. In my garden, I don't have a problem of birds. They come, they eat aphids on tree tomato, but they are not eating my vegetables.
Okay. Thank you, John. We've got a comment from Usi who's saying that mint around the garden also discourages rats. Thanks for that, Usi. And Anisha is saying that our project collects live rats from gardens for the owls, so you can also get in touch with them.
Yeah. And increasing of owls in the project in the urban area, it's very important. But some of our communities, they are associating owls with witchcraft. So sometimes it's a problem that you bring back owls and cats.
Okay. There's not many other questions. I'm just going to wait a bit. If there's anyone else with any questions around maintaining a garden, this is your chance to ask them. Jonathan has commented that birds can also be kept away by hanging old CDs or open chip packets, and the silver keeps birds out of the garden. Thanks, Jonathan, for that. And then Yanni is asking where she can get worms, earthworms.
Where is she best? Where is he best or she? Because we have we have a good network where you can get earthworms. Depends where he lives.
Okay.
If he's in Joburg, we have earthworms, and there are some friends who have lots of earthworms also in Gauteng. Stellenbosch, Western Cape. I'll try to send you Jen. I'll send you some numbers for some guys in Western Cape.
Okay, thanks, John. And then he has a question about pests. So how do you get rid of pests from pepper leaves indoors?
Pest, you can make it tea. The plants like Tephrosia, you can make tobacco leaves. You can do ash brew. If you have wood ash, you mix it with sunlight, soap, a little bit. The ingredients, I can include them in the notes that I'm going to send. So you can spray on pests and then they go away.
Okay, thank you, John. It seems like there's no more questions. So I just want to open it up to Vanessa, and Lawrence has also joined. Vanessa, I see you're still here. If you have any last words that you'd like to say.
Just that there were a couple of comments around markets, and that's a very important aspect, because often we think more around the production and what we're going to grow, and the market becomes a problem, and especially now when people are having difficulty moving around. And I think that's one of the challenges for us in this next while, is to find ways to be innovative around market, to connect to markets. Also with the farm support, that there was a lot of resistance from neighbors to buy from them. Thought that it was better to go and buy from them. Also about talking to the local community, coming up with new ways to prepare food. That's also exciting for young people, sharing how to cook it. And then there's a big challenge for us in terms of both lobbying our local or our provincial governments for access to community market space. And that's something that people can do. And also in finding small-scale processing equipment and ways to process and add value to our produce. So, for example, we heard about people spending a lot of them when they get their social grant, going and buying pickle and all sorts of things like that, that could be processed at home and sold on. So we need to think about it collectively, how we can improve. And also in the Agroecology South Africa group, people are talking about what kind of apps, for example, are good apps that farmers can use to set up localized foodways and connect to potential customers, and which things work and are data, are low on data and easy to use. So yeah, let's have a conversation. I think that's a critical question around how we get our produce to people who really want to have it. Thanks.
Thanks, Vanessa. And Lawrence, I'm not sure if you'd like to add anything.
No, that was super. Everything was well explained. And thanks to John for elaborating the session.
Okay, thank you, Lawrence. John, back to you. Any final words for the series?
I'd like to thank participants and Jane for organizing a BioWatch, for adding value to what we are trying to share with communities. But it's now in their own hands. That it's their choice to go back and grow their own food. It is food. Growing food is funny. Growing food is something that should be like a daily thing that you can do for your family. And also, you don't need much time. In a week, you can just save about 2 hours. You can grow enough vegetables for the family. You split it, maybe 20 minutes a day, something like that, and you can grow food. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, John. And thank you to Vanessa as well for your input. So, as I said, this was our final workshop on how to set up your food garden. And I'd just like to encourage you, I'm going to share my screen, that if you have set up a garden, to please list it on our Food Commons map, which is on the SAFSI website. You just go to COVID-19 Solidarity and you'll find it there. We're trying to map, plot all the different Food Commons initiatives in the country, and it would be great if we could see your home gardens, your community gardens listed there. And we can show that it is really possible to have an alternative food system, to have an agroecological food system. So please go there. And then this is the last session for this series, but it's not over. We've decided we're going to take a little break. And then starting in about the second week of September, we will carry on with our second phase of agroecology training. And there we're going to look at topics like water management, waste management, land management, pesticides, what else was there? Zero waste, indigenous foods, edible weeds. So stick around. We will send out announcements on Facebook. We will email all the participants. We'll also email you with the recording of this workshop. And John has also agreed to write up a brief outline of what he's covered in each of these workshops so that you have it and you can refer back to it and read it. So we'll send that out with the next recording to everyone who's participated, and we'll also try and put a link on our website and share that link on Facebook as well. So that's it from me. Thanks so much again to John. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you back in September.